Hello and welcome back to C# for Beginners video series. I hope you are enjoying the videos and getting some benefit from it. If you are, please subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon so that you are notified when a new video is released. Today I will be talking about objects. C# is a object-oriented programming language, so the concept of objects are very important to understand. So what is an object? Objects represent real-world entities. So we model a real-world entity using objects. An object stores data or state of that entity, and it also allows some actions to perform on that state. So in short, an object stores the state or data of an entity as well as some actions that can be performed on that data. But you can't create an object directly. To create an object, you need a template. So all objects are created from a template. And in programming language, that template is called a class. As an example, let's model a player in a game. So in order to model a player in a game, we need a template for that player. And as I said, the template is called a class. So let's create a template or a class for a player in a game. We use the keyword class and then the name of the template. So since we are modeling a player, we will name the class player. Now it is a convention that everyone follows that the name of a class has to start with a capital letter. So we have a class player and the class has a body enclosed by curly braces. So this is a class of a player, or this is a template for a player object. We can build player objects using this player template, and we can create a player object using the new keyword. So new player, and then you put a open brace and a close bracket, and that creates a new player object. And we can assign this new player object to a variable. Variable player 1 is equal to the new player object. So we just defined a template for a player object and we created a new player object and assigned a variable name player1 to that player object. But our template of the player is empty. It's not doing anything. There's nothing inside the curly braces. So as I said before, an object stores the state of an entity. So let's add some state to this player template. Data or state of an object is tracked or stored using variables defined inside the class. So let's say we want to store the name of the player. So we would define a variable inside the class, and usually the way we define a variable is we define the type of the variable first. So since it's going to be a name, it's going to be of type string, and we're going to give a name to this variable. And let's say we want to name it. We want to track the player's name. So let's say we say name, and we end the line with a semicolon. We've created a new player and named it player1. And we've added a variable name to track the name of the player. If we want to access this name, we can use the dot notation. So the way you access an object's state or action is by placing a dot next to the name of the variable. So we have created a new player object and named it player1. So if we say player1, and then if we want to access the name, we can say dot name. At this time, this is going to error, and the error says player.name is inaccessible due to its protection level. This is a very important thing to understand. Objects not only stores the data or state of an entity, it also protects it by hiding it. What do I mean by that? So right now, the template player is defining a variable name inside the class, but I can't access it because by default, if you declare a variable inside a class, it is a private or hidden property of that class. If I want to expose it, I need to make it a public property. If I add public, the word public in front of the variable definition, this will make the name variable of the player object public. So right now, if I delete that and I pressed a dot sign, now you can see name is now showing up in the IntelliSense, and I can say dot name. This keyword public has a name, and it's called access modifiers. These keywords control access to members of an object. .NET or C# has defined 4 levels of access, and they are public, protected, internal, and private. At this time, we're only going to focus on public and private. If you want to expose a member of a class, you need to mark it as public. Otherwise, if you want that to be hidden, you can make it a private property, private member. So right now, if I mark the name private, name will not be accessible. If I try to access it, player1 dot, and you see the name is no longer there in the IntelliSense. Name, it will give me an error as an access. It's protection, it's inaccessible. If I mark it public and then I try to access the member with the dot notation, now it's available. Name. These keywords, public and private, are called access modifiers. And there is 4 levels of access modifiers in C#. One is public, protected, internal, and private. Private, if you mark a member private, or if you do not have a keyword, if you do not add a keyword, it will be automatically marked by default as private, which means this will be hidden. But if you want to expose it, you can add the public access modifier, and it will be accessible. Now let's set a value to the name property of the player object. We can assign a value to that variable using the equal sign. So player1 dot name equals John Doe. And we can get it and we can read it just by using the dot notation. Let's print out the name of player1. Console.writeLine, we're using player1.name, and this will print out the name we set John Doe of player1. Let's run it, and we can see that the name is printed out. Let's add another variable to track the player's progress or to track the player's points. So this is a point, and it's going to be an integer. It's going to be a number. And we're going to add, and let's add a value to the point. So initially when a player is created, the point has to be set to 0. So let's say player, but there is a problem here. What's preventing me from setting the point set to 100? So we just created a player, named it player1. We named the player John Doe, and the point, we are setting it to 100. Actually, I can set it to anything. I can set it to -5. So in a game, if somebody wanted to, or if the point of a new player to 1000, which will give the player some additional advantage, but we do not want this. every player, when they are created, their point be set to 0. So this is why the access modifiers are there, because we do not want anyone to set the point of a player. Only the program who is creating the player will need to set it. So we have to make this private. So now since we made it private, no one can set the point of a player. But how do we set it? It has to be set to 0 initially. So every template of an object provides a special method or provide a special way to initialize the object. And these are called constructors. A class can have a constructor to create the initial image of the object. And it has an access modifier public, and then it has the same name of the class, and open brace, close brace, and a block of code. And inside this block of code, we can set the value of our variables that are defined in here. And we can also set the private variables. I can set point equals to 0. So this method is called the constructor method. The constructor method builds the initial version of an object, or in this case, the initial version of a player object. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that when we are creating a new player, we're calling new player with open brackets and close brackets. And this signature looks very similar to this signature. When we are creating an object from a class, we are actually calling the constructor method. And we can also pass in information to the constructor object. So instead of doing player1.name and set it to John Doe, we can basically pass this name John Doe to the constructor method so that the name is set to John Doe. But in order to do that, we have to modify our constructor method. You can pass information to the constructor method using parameters. Parameters are defined inside this open and close bracket of a method. So each parameter, there can be more than one parameter, and each parameter has to define its type. So since we're going to pass the name to the constructor method, the type of the parameter is going to be a string, and a parameter must have a name. And we're going to say the name is a name. So we've defined a parameter for the constructor method and named that parameter a name. And inside the constructor method, we can set the value being passed to the method through the parameter to our own name variable. So our name variable equals the parameter name. And now, since our constructor is expecting a name parameter, we have to provide the value in our call. So instead of doing that, we can just pass in the name we want to send. So now we are setting John Doe to this parameter a name, and that a name value is being set to our name variable. And if we run the program, it will print John Doe. And there you go. A class can have multiple constructor methods, but with different combinations of the parameters. Let's add another constructor with no parameters. So here I have added another constructor, and this constructor doesn't take any parameters. It sets the point value to 0. When creating a new player object, now we have two options. We can either call the constructor with the name of the player, or we can use the empty constructor. and set the player one dot name to John Doe. So now we have the player template or the class player, and we have defined the state of the player's state using the variables point and name, and we have a way to construct the player object using the constructor methods. Now let's add some actions to the player class. Let's look at this point variable. Let's change the name of the point to score because point is a bit misleading. Score. We now have a score variable, which is a private and which is not accessible from outside since it's private. So, but we are setting the score in the constructor to 0, but we won't be able to read it. We can't say console.writeLine player1.score because score is private. So we need a way to read the score method. So this would be a perfect way or a perfect example to show an action example. So we're going to add an action to read or to get the score from the player object. And we can do that using methods. Methods are very similar to the constructor methods. There's only one difference. So let's add a method to read the score. And the method will have a public accessor because we want this method to be accessed publicly. And we're going to have a return type. Since we're going to return the score and we need to match the variable of the data type of it, so int, and then we will have to name this method. Let's say we are going to name it get score, and we don't need to put a parameter in this method, and the method will have a method body. Compare this method with the constructor method. They are both public. The constructor method is named as the same name public, but it doesn't have a return type. So this method has a name getScore, public accessor, and it has a return type. The return type is int, which means that when somebody is calling this method, they can get back a data which is of type integer. So how do we return the score? Well, we can use the keyword return. Return, and we're going to return score. So when somebody calls this method, it is going to return the score, which is defined in here. So let's print out the score. So we're doing console.writeLine player1 dot get score. We're using the dot notation to access the methods defined in the object. Let's run it, and the score is printed as 0. Let's add another action. We're getting the score, but we need to set the score, or there must be a way to increase the score. Okay, we can define another action or method, public, and since we're setting it, this method will not have anything to return. So if a method has nothing to return, we put in the word or the keyword void, since it returns nothing. And we can say set score. But this method needs a parameter because we want to set the score to a value. And this value has to be passed on to this method using a parameter. And we need a parameter. We need to define every parameter has a data type and a name. So this has to be the same data type of this because we are setting this this variable. So it has to be an int, and we need to name this parameter. So we can say new score, and this method will have there. And inside this, we're gonna say score, which is this value. Score is set to new score. Now, since this method's return type is void, there's no need to return. There's no need to use the return keyword. Now let's set the score of the player to 10. Say after some time the player earned 10 points of score. So let's set it. So player, so I'm using the dot notation to set the score to 10. And after setting the score to 10, let's print the new score. So we created a new player, and then we are printing the get score, which should print 0. Then we're setting the score to 10, and then we are trying to reprint. We're reprinting the score. Let's run it. There you go. So initially the score was 0. After setting it to 10, it's now 10. Note about the return keyword. When the program finds a return keyword, it exits that function on that line. So if I have a return keyword here, and if I did console.writeLine, if I call the get score, this function will stop executing at this line. So this line is not even going to be executed. That is why it's saying this is unreachable code. As soon as you have a return keyword, the code inside that function will stop or will exit that function on that line. Anything you put afterwards is not going to get executed. Okay, so let's delete the console.writeLine. We have here a private variable of type int named score. Then we have two public accessor methods. One is the get score to get the score, and one is to set the score. Now imagine if you have 10 or 15 properties like this. So you're going to have to write a lot of code just to get and set the values of those variables. We can replace all these lines of code and use one single line using properties. The way you define a property is first you state the public access modifier, then you define the type. It's going to be int since it's a score. Then you put the name of the property, score. And it's a convention to capitalize the name of the property. Then the property has a block of code with curly braces, and inside the curly braces you have the get and the set separated by semicolons. And here it is. This is a property, and since we have a property, we can set the values of these properties just like previously. All we have to do is just change the name to a capital score, and this one, and instead of calling the set score, you set the value as if you're setting a public property. So you should dot, and then you will see the score in IntelliSense, and you set the value to 10. And the same way you can get it, instead of a get score, you just call the property dot score. And here also you say dot score. So if you are reading the property by just calling the dot name of the property, the get is called and the value of the score is returned. And if you are assigning a value to the property, that value is set and the set accessor is called. So this is called a property. And the advantage of using properties is that you can reduce a lot of code. And you can also modify the way these get and set accessor methods work.
There is a problem with this code. What is preventing me from setting the score to -10? Let's run it. So the point is now become -10, which is not correct. If for some reason we're setting the score to a negative number, our score should be reset to 0. How can we fix that? Well, the properties that we've defined for a score allows us to add bodies to this get method and this set method, but we have to add back that private property that we deleted before. So we've added back that private property score. Now, it is a convention to add an underscore in front of the name of a private property. So we've defined the score back. So now we can add bodies to the get method and the set method. You add the curly braces next to the get and 2 curly braces next to the set. In the get method, we just return the value in the underscore score method. But in this set method, we have to check first before setting it. The set method provides a special keyword, value. This value keyword or this value variable inside the set method represents the number that is being set here. So we just need to check if this value is less than 0 or not. So if value is less than 0, we set the score to 0. Otherwise, we set the variable scores value to that special value. Let's run the code now. So now you see the score is 0, even though we are adding the score as a negative number. So this would be a way to add your custom code to the properties get and set method. Let's convert the name to a property as well. So it's going to be public string name, and it will be a get and a set. And we just need to change this one to capital name. And there we go. And this one to capital name. And run it. This will be the same result. Okay, so we have gone over a lot of information in this video. Let's name some of the concepts that we've learned. A class is a template for building object. We use the new keyword to create an object based on this class template. And this process of newing up an object is called instantiation. So you instantiate a player using the new keyword. You use the dot notation to access the members of an object. So you use the dot to access the data properties of an object or actions of an object. The private variables you define inside a class are called instance variables because these variables belong to an instance of an object. You can add properties to a class. You can have custom get and set methods, or you can have a normal get and set without any check. You use constructors to construct or instantiate a new object. You can have multiple constructors. We learned about parameters that you pass to the constructor or other methods, and a parameter is defined by a type, the type of the parameter, and a name. We've come to the end of today's video. I hope you learned about objects, and if you are getting any benefit from this video series, please subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon so that you are notified when a new video is released. Goodbye.